3 shootings at taverns over the weekend, 21 people dead, 15 shot to death in Nomzamo in Soweto, 2 killed in Katlehong, 4 killed in Pietermaritzburg, 8 people in hospital from that incident. Police have yet to establish a link or motive in any of them. Let's speak now to criminologist Dr. Guy Lamb from Stellenbosch University. Dr. Lamb, thank you very much for your time. The Soweto mass shooting, 5 suspects wanted there. Police minister saying they're from Nomzamo in KwaZulu-Natal. Our reporter Moloko is saying that it seems quite a few of the patrons have a link to KwaZulu-Natal. Is that where you would start in trying to figure out what possible motive there could be for such a horrific crime?
Well, most definitely. I mean, there is a connection between certain parts of KwaZulu-Natal and kind of violence that we've seen within Gauteng. And I mean, this goes back for decades. I mean, we've got the area, for example, Masinga, which is quite notorious for mass shootings and mass violence and about intergroup rivalries and intergroup conflicts. And often those conflicts spill over into Gauteng. So there has been long history of this kind of connection going on. So definitely, if it's around, if hitmen are from that specific area, I think the investigations need to go back to that area to try and ascertain if there are more to this violence than potentially extortion or potentially conflicts within Soweto. But we have seen this connection in the past.
Talk to me about what you know around Nomzamo. Is it an area, for example, that's known for taxi violence or for even grooming taxi assassins?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on the area, but what we do know from an area like Nomzamo is that it is renowned for taxi violence, and it's renowned for the use of violence to resolve disputes between taxi associations, between rival taxi factions, where, experts in the use of violence or hitmen have been used. And of course, then those particular individuals have been used to resolve disputes in other parts of the country as well.
Can we rule out at this point a link? All these 3 tavern shootings took place on the same night, admittedly in different areas, Soweto, Katlehong and Sweetwater in Pietermaritzburg, but all involved a gunman or gunmen walking into a tavern and just indiscriminately, it seems, opening fire.
I think these ones are just coincidental. I mean, we have had a number of cases of violence within shebeens and taverns over the recent months. I mean, Khayelitsha has been a kind of a sort of a hotspot for this. We've had Gugulethu in the past. We've had other parts in the Western Cape. For example, Philippi East and Samora Michelle in the Western Cape have also been kind of hotspots for this kind of violence. And we know also when it comes to murders, the areas within and around taverns and shebeens tend to be the most at-risk areas if you're going to be murdered or injured in relation to robberies or interpersonal violence. So we know that these are kind of key areas. But certainly what we are noticing is a lot more, there's kind of been quite a substantial increase in violence around taverns and shebeens. So it certainly warrants further investigation.
I think it's columnist Max Dupré who wrote today, concerned about the possibility of a third force whipping up violence and instability. And we can't ignore the fact that it is 1 year to the week from the July unrest. Would you say that that's a very unlikely option?
Well, it's difficult to say without evidence. I mean, certainly we've seen, if we look back at the looting, there was, other, sort of hidden hands at play, or not so hidden hands at play. There were certain elements, linked to certain factions within the ANC that were playing quite a prominent role in fomenting that violence. If we look at the roles of certain elements within the state security agencies, certainly under the Zuma administration, with the kind of networks that were operating illegally there, played a role, for example, in trade unions. They played a role in kind of destabilizing certain areas. So one always needs to keep one's eyes open and not dismiss these kind of things. But certainly this sort of violence does look like it's quite coincidental and does look like it's quite specific. And it has to do with specific sorts of conflicts or specific sorts of criminality.
The police minister has said that he's going to be moving in the Amabarete, which is the tactical response unit, into the area, I presume to try and figure out motive, that sort of thing. Do you think that's going to help?
Well, I mean, this is the sort of conventional playbook that the minister and sort of certainly the provincial commissioner and also the national commissioners have used. Is, when areas have kind of hit with the sort of crisis that we've seen at the moment, we've seen it in Lenasia, we've seen it in Deep Sloot, and it's really an effort to sort of show that national government is on top of things, that they're really taking the situation seriously. So this is quite a sort of a demonstration of force. I mean, Ama Barete or the Special Task Force, I mean, their role is dealing with kind of high priority, fairly kind of violent criminal cases, largely dealing with organized crime. So they're more of a kind of a show of force. I mean, what's really needed here is good old crime intelligence to figure out which criminal networks were involved, who ordered the shooting, because, I mean, the gunmen that went in were clearly professional hitmen, but there were orders given for them to go and do that and to try and understand who it was and what their reasons for doing so.
Crime intelligence is a phrase that has cropped up so often, particularly the failure of that regarding last year's unrest. Are you seeing any indication that our crime intelligence structures are ramping up, that there is more intelligence on the ground that the police are able to use to prevent crimes like this? Or are you still seeing a shocking lack of crime intelligence?
I think there's been slow progress. I mean, it's difficult to see the outcomes of that at the moment. I mean, certainly with the change in the National Commissioner, there's, been a stabilization of leadership within crime intelligence. I think there's still more that needs to be done, but it really was a kind of an element within the police, which, the foot was taken off the accelerator, and it, sort of essentially its priorities were not necessarily focused on the interests of South Africans. So that seems to be changing. But I think it's going to be quite a while before we see the kind of level of crime intelligence that we deserve.
We've just got word from our reporter, Moloko, that he's seeing now that the police are starting to gather at the Orlando police station. So it's a sign that the police minister is sticking to his word to bring in that specialized team. But as you say, it's part of the playbook, and it doesn't necessarily provide lasting solutions. So what will work? What will work to provide lasting solutions?
Well, it's difficult in these kind of situations. If it's sort of a standard sort of criminality where you've got sort of street gangs that are preying on residents, you can use, visible policing to deal with this. But if you're wanting to deal with, individuals or groups that are looking to perpetrate mass violence against, shebeens and taverns and businesses within Soweto, it is about deploying solid crime intelligence resources on the ground, building relationships with community leaders, community policing forums, with street committees, getting and, working in a very genuine equal partnership with them to figure out solutions to this, rather than sort of being aloof and having these sort of short-term police deployments. It's about, having a long-term strategy and developing those relationships with the communities and building up trust with them.
Thank you very much. Criminologist Dr. Guy Lamb from Stellenbosch University telling us this evening that at this point he doesn't see necessarily any particular link between those tavern shootings, just tragic coincidence.